afternoon to all of you. It's a great honor for me, Murali Nair, and Elise Collins, my colleague, to introduce you to this amazing program at University of Southern California, and also welcome to our session. And we are going to talk about centenarians in general and super aging in particular. And by the way, my background is I am a clinical professor of social change and innovation at University of Southern California School of Social Work. And I have been doing field studies on centenarians, healthy centenarians for the past 20 years. I traveled to several countries, and so far I have made many documentaries of my field studies on super centenarians and centenarians in 7 countries, and all these 10 minutes, 11 minutes mini documentaries are available on my own website, which is identified here on the chat room. You're welcome to take a look at it. Also, I put 2 case studies on centenarians also on this website. My colleague will be also talking to you later on about her own studies. And my colleague Ellis and I, we just wrote an article in a medical book, a chapter on healthy centenarians. That article is available, and if you send me your email, either to me or Ellis, and we'll be glad to send you that chapter in the book about centenarians. This is a fascinating area. I'm glad you all came and joined us. And what we are not talking as a medical professional. And my colleague's background is in gerontology, mine is in social work and cultural anthropology. The fascination for living long, which exists in all kinds of culture. For example, I just came back about 4 years ago from Costa Rica. I went to a small town in a village area called Nicoya. And there are 7 or 8 areas the National Geographic, they identified as blue zone. But there are a number of other areas also the National Geographic did not identify. And it would be great to look at what make them live longer. So primarily, I was looking at the background of these people who are healthy, and most of them are even vegetarians, and they hardly use modern medicine, and they were able to live long. And so perhaps there are something we can learn from all of them. For example, I identified about 11 different factors as the uniqueness about their healthy long life. And for example, I yet to find healthy centenarians in any of these cultures I visited, all the way from China to the Spice Mountain in India, to Hawaii, and even to Costa Rica. I yet to find a grumpy, grouchy, sad-looking centenarians. Even if they have some negative things happening in their lifestyle, they bounce back. So that is very important. The positive thinking is very much part of their lifestyle. And number 2 is their own the eating habits. Even if they have guests coming in, they always make it a point of eating at a particular time. And even the element of food they consume, the quantity they consume. For example, in the morning they eat long and takes long time, and they eat a heavy meal. For lunch, they may not be eating that much heavy lunch, and evening they eat very little. So there are new studies also coming out, that this kind of eating pattern is very much important. Also, I notice most of them, they fast at least once a day, once a week, perhaps at least in the morning or in the evening, and they make it a point of fasting. And also they do not consume too much. And another factor I notice in their lifestyle is they always keep themselves busy. Even if they are wheelchair bound and they still do not like to stay in one place, they keep move around. And that physically active aspect is very important. And also mentally also they are active. You can ask them, what is the date of birth of your great grandchild, and they should be able to tell you. And somewhere or other they can tell all kinds of anecdotal stories in their past, even from their childhood on. And that kind of a, physically and mentally they are always active. And another thing is the socializing pattern. They not only make friends easily with their own peers, and they have large number of children to even animals, the pets, and it could be a dog or it could be a bird, and you will see them, the way they interacting, it is amazing. And these are some of the factors. And if you are interested in more, you can take a look at my website. I have 2 articles on that one. In general, I think it is possible for all of us to live long. And thanks to modern medicine, I know we can extend our life. And again, there are studies done that our genetics disposition may also is a factor. But beyond that, our lifestyle, I strongly feel it plays a major role. Towards the end, we are going to interact with you. Instead of giving a long lecture, we thought it would be nice if we could have a interactive session, like you could ask us a question or a comment. We'll be glad to share that with you. And with that much introduction, I'm going to let my colleague Ellis to talk about her research and her writing in this area. Then we will come back for question and answer. Thank you all. Okay.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I am Elise Marie Collins, and I hope I'm showing up as the speaker, but in a moment I'll share my screen and that will show up, I hope. So I've written several books, and I wrote a book, An A to Z Guide to Healing Foods, also a book on the chakras, Chakra Tonics. And then a few years ago, I became interested in aging. That's how I found Dr. Nair. And that's how I ended up going to USC Leonard Davis School of Gerontology and getting my master's when I was writing this book, Super Ager, which at first I didn't know what a super ager was. Maybe this is a new concept to you, or maybe it's something you know and understand. But when I first heard the term super ager, I didn't know what it was, but I knew I wanted to find out more about it. And I knew I wanted to be a super ager. So I began my investigations and I haven't looked back. And I really enjoy working with Dr. Nair because he has so much knowledge and both heartfelt wisdom and academic wisdom. And that is what I've seen this all over this conference, but that's not out there in the world as much as I would like it to be. I would love there to be more heartfelt wisdom and bringing a sense of the East and West together. So I'm going to share my screen. I also put in the chat my LinkedIn and Instagram and my website. So let's see, I'm going to share my slideshow. So hopefully this will work. Okay, y'all can see that, I believe. So we have here, this is a centenarian. This man his name is George Nicolau. And I happened to meet him at a football game that I went to with my mom. We're both alumni of UC Berkeley, and we went to the Cal Stanford game together. And this man, he played football in I believe he graduated in 1943, and that was a time when many students were going to World War II. So even though he was a little older when he went to college, that was normal at that time because he served in the war. So he was honored at the game. This was 2 years ago. He's still alive, and he's a centenarian. So centenarians are the fastest growing group of older adults in the United States and globally. In Japan, 1 in every 1,500 people are centenarians. In 1950, there was just 8% of the population over 50. Now, in about, well, 2019, that jumped and doubled to 16.5. In 2050, 22% of the population worldwide will be adults actually over 65 in the US. Sorry, that's in the US. In worldwide, over 60 has been doubling. It doubled since 1980 and it's going to double again in 2050. So 2030, another marker. In 2030, there will be more older adults than children, which is pretty amazing. And all over the world, centenarians are growing faster than any of those age groups. 80,000 centenarians already in Japan. Okay, so we have, just like this conference, it's mind and body, heart and soul. So I've arranged the traits. Some of them Dr. Nair spoke about, but I'm going to go into a little deeper with the mind, the body, heart, and soul, and sort of grouping them in those categories. So it's easier for you to think about it. And I'd like to present it in a way that as practitioners or as people wanting to live longer, you have some takeaways. Okay, so all across cultures, centenarians, as Dr. Nair said, have a very positive attitude. This particular study was done at Albert Einstein College, the first one about positive attitudes. You can find many, but this one was all about near centenarians, 97-year-old. The study covered adults 97 to 107 years old, and they took simple psychological batteries, and it was found that they had much more, on average, positive attitudes than their younger counterparts. And then the other study, a sense of purpose and independence is important to centenarians. This is a really interesting study because this was inverse. This means that they tried to ask centenarians if they felt useless. And if they felt useless, that was not associated with living to be 100 years old. So it's almost like the opposite. If you feel useless, you're much less likely to become a centenarian. So think about that independence and that positive attitude, and all of these traits go together. So keep thinking about that. Even though we've sort of group them, they all layer and complement each other. It's not like one food or one exercise or one thing. It's all about the sense of self and this integrated sense of self in my mind. So yeah, I'll just reiterate, centenarians are less likely to perceive themselves as useless compared to younger cohorts. That's really important. Okay, then we'll go on to the next mind. Oh, now we're, oh, I wanted to say, yeah, actually, I'm going to go back to that. I skipped one. That's what happened. I was like, where's the other mind slide? The lady in this slide, she is Kane Takeo, I believe that's her name. She's the oldest woman in the world. You can Google her. I may not be pronouncing it correctly. She's 117 years old. She was born in 1903. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Kane Tanaka. There it is. I have it here. She was born in 1903, and she loves to play board games. So cognitive health, there's many things we can do for cognitive health. And we can also ask Dr. Nair at the end of this presentation, because I know that he talks about this in his field studies, and I have him cited here. Many of these citations are in our chapter. If you want a copy of that, we can send it to you because we have all of this research. A few of the research items are in my book, but a lot of them are coming from our chapter in the medical textbook. So puzzles, reading, memorization, board games. As Dr. Nair said, the centenarians are always busy, always learning, keeping their mind active. And we know that neuroplasticity is increased by activities. And I also listed some other ones like ping pong, catch, activities that we use sight, reaction time, touch, and the more senses we use, the better. Because I think sometimes board games and crossword puzzles and things like that are good, but things like cooking. I just did the mindful cooking and eating. Cooking is associated with living longer, believe it or not. And that can actually help your mind. One other thing that helps the mind that I think is not talked about enough is socializing. And especially, there's some really interesting research done by Dr. Claudia Kawas, and she's at UC Irvine. And what she found is that when we socialize, especially with people we don't know, this is really stimulating to the brain. So it's really good for us to go out. And I know this is challenging during COVID time, so this might not be happening, but even on Zoom, we look at people and we look at their reactions. We see if they're smiling. Uh, we hear, and when we're meeting somebody, we're really trying to get to know them. So are they joking? You know, did they say something? You know, everybody has a little bit different sense of humor, right? So when we meet strangers, we have a different it's a different mental stimulation. Now think about it. And this is something important for the COVID times, because if you're living with people, and a lot of us have noticed this, that we get in these same patterns. We think we know what our spouse, or we know what our child or our older adult parents, we think we know what they're going to say. We think we know what they're thinking. So we get kind of rote. So that's why it's really important to interact with people that we don't know. So even though we might not be able to go out there in the world and interact like we used to, think about that when you go on maybe a Zoom call. You could do some kind of activity or hobby. There's so many ways to interact, and it's good for your brain. And if you want to know more about that, that research is in my book, and I can always send it to you. So body. Many centenarians are vegetarian, especially in the traditional cultures in India, where Dr. Nair did a lot of research in the Spice Mountains, and he can tell you in the questions, if you have more questions, he can give you much more detailed information. We know from Dr. Dean Ornish, he's done a lot of research on plant-based diet, how it lengthens telomeres, however you want to pronounce them. And you don't necessarily have to be full-on vegetarian, but in my mind, the more vegetables that you can eat, the better. My mom loves to cook, as I said, and she's been cooking since she was 5 years old, and she cooks pretty much for an entire life. Every evening meal, she has at least 2 to 3 vegetables. And I think that's one of her secrets to longevity. I also mentioned before that cooking and preparing food, there's a study that was done in Taiwan that showed that it's correlated. It was a longitudinal study. So cooking was correlated with living longer. Fasting, that's another one. That's traditional. I'm sure there's studies on that, but I know from my own experience that fasting can be a very spiritual experience uh, when done carefully and maybe with support. Because if you've never done it before, I would say enlist with a naturopathic doctor, an acupuncturist, or somebody who has experience with that. Especially if you're feeling afraid. I know some people got fearful of doing fasting, but there's many ways to do it. And there's a lot of traditional Ayurveda that says you don't even have to stop eating. You could just simplify your diet, have a few sort of mono-type meals. And I'm a big fan of that type of fasting. So it's not like having no food, but just having sort of like a porridge type meal for an entire day. So you're eating the same thing, but you're still eating. Okay, so body. We have a few more body slides. So centenarians move naturally as a part of daily life. We know from the blue zones that this is true across all the blue zones. I'll name them in case anybody doesn't know all of the blue zones. So let's see if I can do it. There's Sardinia in Italy, the Nicoya Peninsula, where Dr. Nair did some videos. Loma Linda, California, which is the one exception that's not geographically isolated, Ikaria, Greece, and Okinawa, Japan. In all of those areas, people move about in their daily life. And one interesting point to note is that in the island of Sardinia, the men are shepherds and they climb these incredibly steep mountains, and they've been doing it their entire life because there's really not any other jobs. So if you're a male, everybody, all males pretty much are shepherds, and they're taking their sheep, they're walking up these incredibly steep hills and walking about average 7 miles or more a day. So Sardinia is the place where men live the longest. I'll repeat that: men live the longest. We know women live longer than men. I didn't mention that in the beginning of the presentation, but in case you didn't know, women outlive men all over the world globally, in the United States, in every country, except in Sardinia, where the men probably live maybe the same amount, but they live a very long life. So it's believed that that exercise gives them a little bit extra boost. And it's not like they're going to the gym. In all of the blue zones, it's just something you do. You tend to your garden, you take a walk, you do all these natural things. So I have here, this is a senior like dance group. I don't know what team that is, somebody who's from New Jersey, but a lot of NBA basketball teams are starting these dance groups. So dancing, that's another way that we move naturally. And if you love dancing, you can keep doing that until you're 100. So being active also, I want to point out, it supports independence. And that's really important because we think of exercise as sort of a one-stop shop. Like, I've got to exercise to live long, but we don't realize that exercise supports all these social habits. And as Dr. Nair said, we're not drilling down into the molecules as much, but we can find the research that supports the habits and the lifestyle that we're outlining. And I find it very interesting how much, and that was the shocker for me. I didn't say this, but I'm a yoga teacher. And so as a yoga teacher, I was all about the exercise, the healthy diet. But when I found out how important socializing is with family, with friends, that trumped pretty much everything else, that was more important. That was shocking to me. But I also want to say that exercise supports that, because when we're feeling good, when we are active, then it supports and it's a foundation for that socialization. And here, this slide illustrates it perfectly. Dancing again, at parties, at family gatherings, music. My son's a musician, and I know he's also a student of music, and he's writing about music. So all these things are, as you can imagine in your mind, they're all intertwined. So for practitioners, how can we promote to our patients, to our clients, to keep active, to keep vibrant? Because we will have setbacks and we will sometimes feel withdrawn and go through difficult times. We want to keep, it's like, get out there in the mix, get out there and be with people. Social activities contribute. There's so much research on this, but I have one here, and this is in our chapter. And I also love, well, the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about family, but traditional cultures, they value elders. And in those traditional cultures here, we're in the West, we're much more ageist. So that's a whole other discussion. I don't want to go down the ageist rabbit hole, but we can look to these traditional cultures where the elders are respected and almost like, they're almost like celebrities. They actually are celebrities in Sardinia, in Italy. They actually have a calendar for all the centenarians, the men centenarians, the male centenarians. There's a calendar that celebrates them. So everyone wants to get this calendar. So it's a different approach. And I think that that's what I lean into, how important it is. And volunteering, there's been some studies on volunteering and how volunteering stimulates that respect and that value that you might have in a more traditional culture. So that's good to know for us, again, practitioners who are looking for ways, because the world isn't always as welcoming as we know for older adults, the Western world. So heart and family, yes, as Dr. Nair said, centenarians, and there's much evidence that older adults that interact with children and teenagers, this is a trait that promotes longevity. Belonging, positive social interaction are correlated with living longer. And most centenarians maintain close ties with family. And we can also extrapolate that from a lot of the research in gerontology. We can also have something called families of choice. So there's situations where if your family is, for whatever reason, you don't have a family, or you've been estranged from your family, we can create a family of choice, some group of individuals that support us like a family. I just want to speak a little bit about uh, another trait of the heart and intergenerational yoga. I haven't gotten the 5-minute time, but I'm going to get through the slides. I don't have that many more. I love something I've created, or I don't know if anyone else has done it, but I call it intergenerational yoga. And I started this practice with a family that I did private lessons with. And I used to do lessons with one of my clients, and then she became a grandmother. And then one time her mother was visiting. So we had all 4 generations doing yoga together. And I think another time one of her nephews joined. So we had even a teenager. We had a baby, a mother, and a teenager, grandmother and great grandmother together. And because I've studied in all types of yoga, like I've taught prenatal, I've taught kids yoga, I can teach older adults, I felt more like I was a conductor. And I would just like get this section of the people doing, the older adults could be in a chair, or then we have the baby, maybe the baby's just smiling, or we put the baby in a little position. So I'm conducting them, but we're all in sync, we're all together. And it's an activity that we can do that entrains us, it brings us together on a heartfelt way, and it also takes us away from our devices, because there's not many things that we do together as family members, maybe eating, we play games, but yoga is a great one. So I hope to be writing a book on intergenerational yoga, but I invite you to just try it with your family, even just your, doesn't have to be 4 generations. It can be with your children, with your parents, and feel free to contact me for tips. Okay, so the last thing I'll say about this slide is just, we know for those of us that are into personality traits, we know that from many studies, and I'll just highlight the Georgia, there's many studies like the Georgia Centenarian study, and we have these in our notes at the end of our chapter, some of the studies that we refer to and that you can also look at if you're interested in exploring. The Georgia Centenarian Study, the New England Centenarian Study, Okinawa Centenarian Study, and there's even more than that, but those specifically are some that have been collected data. Some of them are past time, some of them are a little more present time, but I just wanted to speak to some of the personality traits of the centenarians. And what we find is there's this combination of high competency, high extroversion, and low neuroticism. And I find this interesting because this also ties back to yoga and the heart. We can use our yoga practice. What I've learned from my yoga practice is to be more disciplined, to be more, quote unquote, competent. So we can, if we're feeling like we're a little bit, scattered or disorganized person, I think of myself as that because I'm ADD. I love to learn everything, do everything, but I've become more disciplined through my yoga practice. I think I've also gotten more extroverted. I feel more confident. It's an internal confidence. And then low in neuroticism, things like yoga, or if yoga's not your thing, there's a lot of different practices that can help us, I want to say release neuroticism. That might not be the best way to say it, but I think you know what I mean, to decrease, that's a better way of saying it, decrease our neuroticism. Okay. Oh, so I did have another heart. Yeah. So they love to assist friends. Centenarians feel valued and respected in their community. And there's the conscientiousness and extroversion that we find in the Georgia Centenarian study and other centenarian studies as well. These traits that we can, just like Lisa Miller said, they could be somewhat genetic, but there's a lot that we can shift and change on our own. And this lady here, I don't remember her name, but we can ask Professor Nair. She was the subject of a beautiful documentary that I loved. And that's actually how I found Dr. Nair, because I was like, I loved his videos and I was like, oh my God, I want to find this guy. He's amazing. And I want to study with him. So this is another, there's Dr. Nair with a super centenarian. And the lady in the last slide, she was also a super centenarian. A super centenarian is someone who is over 110 years old. And centenarians, in traditional cultures, they commonly express feelings of being connected to the divine. And I think that's why Lisa Miller's work is so important, because our modern concepts, or sometimes religious concepts, they're through different filters. So I think that the centenarians can help us expand those concepts. I know for me as a yoga teacher, I'm constantly working with students that um, maybe they had unpleasant experiences growing up in certain religions. And so they can turn to other concepts. And I learn a lot from studying the centenarians, and then I share that knowledge with them and from the traditional cultures. So another important thing for the soul or faith is belief, again, in a higher power. We don't have to define that for anyone. And the next slide is going to be a little more about nature, because that's always for me the default. Is higher power could just be looking at the trees, at the forest, at the maybe the ocean, because there's so much there and we can't possibly comprehend it. It's much bigger than ourselves. So to me, there's a power that I cannot comprehend in my human brain. So nature and the environment reduce stress. There's many studies on this. There's practices like forest bathing. If you've heard of that, that's a practice where you simply go into the forest. You're not taking off your clothes. You're just feeling the forest around you. And there's a lot of evidence that this reduces our sympathetic response. We go into parasympathetic response when we're in nature much more easily. And the forest, you can look up forest bathing and look up studies on that. Nature and the environment, if we think of that homeostasis in our body, we can think of what the traditional centenarians and the traditional cultures, such as traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, there's a concept that homeostasis is in everything, not just the physiology, but in nature. And that reflects back. So when we look out into nature, and I think we've all experienced that, because when I teach a yoga class, I often do a meditation and I tell people to imagine they're in a beautiful natural environment, a beautiful place. And maybe that's in nature, maybe that's in their favorite place in nature. And when they imagine that, when they conjure that, when they visualize that, they remember that feeling of being in nature, and they usually feel much, much more relaxed. So I think that I don't know that much about particular studies that study that visualization of nature, but I know it works in my classes. So I'm going to give it a thumbs up on the experiential. And for myself, it works for me when I sit quietly, especially if I'm feeling a little agitated. If I imagine I'm in a forest or at the beach, it really helps to calm my nervous system. I just want to introduce another idea, which is the idea of elemental homeostasis, because this also comes from traditional Chinese medicine and also Ayurveda, where we can also conceptualize the elements. And I have here earth, water, air, metal, ether. In Ayurveda, it's earth, water, fire, and ether. And I could be wrong. I'm not an expert in traditional Chinese medicine, but there's also metal and wood. There's also wood, but those uh, elements, so to speak, have different properties. And they help us conceptualize balance in our daily life. So, for example, in different seasons, like now we're more in the fall season, and the fall is thought of as more of air. So, if we think of the leaves blowing, so when we have more air, then we need more earth. So we just, all humans need that. And then we have our own internal needs. If we are more, creative and anxious, we need more earth. So we need more of that stillness, that quiet. So it takes some time to get used to this, but I think of it as a kind of a health literacy that is an Eastern health literacy, for lack of a better word. But I would love to write about that too, because we know that health literacy in the West means, reading what the medication says, or reading instructions, or knowing how to do something, learning about health by reading or checking something on the internet. But I think there's a different health literacy where we feel it, that kind of your body talks to you. And then we also think about what we need in that moment, in that season, in that day. So if you want to.
Elise, if I may, we have only 10 more minutes left.
Oh, okay. I didn't get the
I'm so
5-minute
sorry.
warning. Okay. Oh, I'm done. Okay. I'm sorry. I thought I can't see the clock. So let me just see the last.
I know this is a topic, there are lots to talk about. And if anyone is interested, you are willing to share your slides with them, right, Elise?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. I was waiting for the thing. I'll just say, yeah, you can see here implications, support, patients, independence, and just know that all older adults are unique. So yeah, is there any questions? Sorry about that. I didn't hear.
What we could do, Elise, is let us see whether there are questions, and
I'm going to share.
Listen to Christopher, and then if there is still time, we can interact, Christopher, go for it, Christopher.
I don't have any questions in the chat, but if you would like to ask the question, please type it into the chat box. And if you'd like to ask your question verbally, just type in the chat and I'll unmute you for your question.
Okay. Christopher,
please type your question in the chat.
Do you have any question, Christopher?
I don't have any questions right now, but that was great.
Yeah, okay. I am sorry, Elise, to cut you off. Maybe you could continue then. And if there are any questions, Christopher could interrupt us,
What I can do is just say a little more, and then I'll ask you a question, because I'm interested in how we can take this forward. I know that you do a lot of these practices that you've seen. Maybe you could tell us about I love the story that I read once. You met a centenarian that lived in India that was very wealthy, and you found him sweeping the street. Could you talk a little bit about him and how you learned from him?
That's a very good question. Elise, there's a whole concept of karma and dharma. You might have heard about it. I think it is becoming a very popular word, the karma. And so there is a whole lifespan, during the lifespan. And there is something even the elders, they very much take it into granted, that the people, like in the morning, Dr. Miller was talking about the concept of spirituality and divinity, and it exists in all of us. There is a whole concept of self-realization. How do we realize that particular concept is very important, and we do not know who is going to be coming in front of you. It could be a stranger, it could be a child, didn't eat any food, and asking for food, or someone looks sad, that person may have a divinity in such a way that we should not ignore, whatever we can do it, maybe even a smile, a person, who looks sad and upset, and if you can reassure them that everything going to be all right, that kind of a words coming out, is very important. And even again, a role model in our society, and we have that haves and have-nots, and in a lot of this culture, the concept of practice wisdom coming out of the elders is very much part of the role model we are talking about, and so it doesn't matter, like where you are rich, materially rich or poor, doesn't matter. The actions and each and every action we undertake will have its own social impact, you know. So that is why the concept of giving and caring, and they claim that it has a spillover effect on you. That spillover effect is nothing but this karma we are talking about, you know. And you inherit that karma through doing something good for others. It is everybody think you have to give money. It is not giving money, you know, just being kind to others. And that thought, you know, that kind of kindness is very much part of this dharma. The dharmic is doing something good to others. That's what you're looking at. You know?
All right, Dr. Nair and Ms. Collins, there's actually 3 questions that I have now in the chat box. So since there's only like 6 minutes left, maybe take a minute or two to answer each of them. So the first question is from Zora. What would a centenarian say is their secret to longevity? 2, from Diane. Did you find anything about drinking a glass of wine a day, whether or not that is helpful for longevity? And lastly, Margaret says that the blue zones are fascinating. Are the isolated centenarians in the community, do they have these characteristics as well? So feel free to answer them, whatever ones come first. And if you forget the question, then I can repeat it again, or you can look in the chat.
Thank you, Christopher. And let me try to attempt the first one, and then the wine part, I will leave it to Elise. The, the, the secret to their long life, and basically what they do is they try to, you can look at it, you know, I have done in 7 countries, you know, and the commonality is, like I was saying, the positive attitude to life, and the keeping physically and mentally well. That is very, very important, you know, and what we are eating. And these are the 3 areas, you know. And also, I forgot to tell you, there is a concept called believe in something which is unknown. Sometimes, you know, I ask the question, hey, what is your secret of long life? They raise their hand like this and look up in the sky and just say, someone out there, the unknown. They believe in, you know, that there is some divinity, there is a power out there, which is more or less controlling us, you know. So that is very much there. And I'll come back to the last question, and maybe Elise, you want to talk about the wine? I know in Italy, especially the Sardinians, they do that thing, I thought.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I'd say about the wine is I always think it's like a mosaic. It's everybody has different habits. Some people love wine. They want to have a glass of wine a day. Some centenarians don't want to drink wine, or some older adults don't want to drink wine. I think everybody, and this was what I was going to say for the last slide, is that we want to encourage our own aging strengths. So I'll give my parents as examples because they, there's a lot of things they don't do right. Well, I'm not going to talk about what they don't do right, but I'm just going to say where they're really strong is my mom fixes lots of vegetables, they eat lots of vegetables, and they're very confident. I think they just grew up in a time when they had a lot of opportunities, so they feel like they can go out and do things. They're not shy, or they're humble in a certain way, but they feel a certain confidence, and I think that's really important because you need to keep getting up and going and doing things. Confidence can also have a something where if you're arrogant or you think you can do anything, that's when you might, pick up a suitcase and then accidentally fall down because it's too heavy. So we want to have a balance of different traits. And I think wine can come into that because some people, there was a man, the oldest man in the United States was 109. And I think he passed away maybe early this year. And he was a very social guy. And I think he liked to eat ice cream and smoke cigars, but he had that social personality. Everyone loved to gather around him. So to me, it kind of balances out.
Yeah, Elise, if I may, there is a question here about the blue zone, but now there are a lot of areas I venture out which are not defined as blue zone. In a blue zone, they look for the credential, the evidence of the person who is considered centenarian, and they look for a birth certificate. And if they belong to a church, they can get a birth certificate from the pastor or otherwise. There are countries like in India where 80% of them are Hindus. I was in Sri Lanka where 80% are Buddhist. There, the credentialing, the proof of the birth certificate will be difficult. So that way we are negating them as not part of the blue zone. But there are communities where there are pockets of healthy centenarians, or they are living alone. But I think we need to really look for it, And again, there is a question about the divinity and the God, and that is very much true. That again reinforces what Dr. Miller was talking also this morning. So that concept I told you, equated to karma and dharma and divinity and self-realization, that is very much there, And there are more questions coming up, and uh, what we could do is, if you, our email is with you all, and you are welcome to write to us. And meanwhile, we promise we will share with you our latest article. And please keep your eyes open. And I think the aging population, we need to respect them and put them to work. There are all kinds of pilot studies being done here, all the way from the elders are asked to come to the kindergarten class, preschool classes. And so we need to respect, someone is asking 75 is too old, nothing like that. I think, we need to respect our elders that practice wisdom is immeasurable in terms of our final understanding of this population. There is a more research to be done there. We wish you all the best. I'm sorry, Christopher. Yeah.
I have a couple, I can answer a couple more questions if we have time. The ageist rabbit hole, Laurel said, I mentioned that traditions that promote healthy aging. We've veered away from these traditions, but I would recommend, what I think would help is having more intergenerational community gatherings. We just don't have that many places where we have older adults and younger adults interacting. I have a vision to maybe have dinner parties or community gatherings. And during this time, having, we can have online groups where we bring generations together. I think that by seeing and knowing each other, that is a way to get rid of these stereotypes. I think that Zeke Emanuel said something like, we shouldn't live past 75. To me, that's very nihilistic. Not, it's like going down the Western idea of separation. Like, we are, what I've gotten from the yoga tradition is we are a human form. That human form, it does begin to disintegrate and fall away. But like Dr. Nair said, we have karma and dharma. We have more than this body. We take care of this body. We honor it as sacred. But then as we age, the form becomes less important. So someone like Dr. Zeke Emanuel, I would say he probably is just a form person. He may not have a lot of sense of that internal spiritual self. I don't know him and I don't know his work that well, but that's my sense. And I'm much more interested in being around people that want to explore that inner spiritual world.
Thank you very much. And I think, Christopher, we need to leave now, right?
Yeah. If you want, you can stay for another 3 minutes till 1:55, but then I have to prepare the room for the next set of speakers. And I'm sure you want to get ready for your next room as well.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Integrating generations. Yeah. If there's anything else, the birth certificate, I think I could just address that quickly. I believe, like, why would someone want to, I mean, there's a sort of an idea that you want to become a celebrity. And I think that's so, I don't see that many cases where people want to be known for their age, that they either fake a birth certificate. A lot of people, as Dr. Nair said, don't have birth certificates because of where they live. They just didn't have birth certificates. It's a traditional culture. So everybody in the village knows how old you are. They have certain records, but the Western you know, the way that you are, the blue zone is actually a demographer's circle around an area that has a certain number of centenarians, and the demographers will not circle the blue zone unless they have a birth certificate. So anyway, we're going to be seeing more and more centenarians. So I think that the research is just going to continue, and feel free to contact us because I think we're out of time, but I love talking about these issues. And please feel free to email me, connect on LinkedIn or Instagram. Thank you.